My name is Philip Neal, and in this video I'm going to be walking you through my research that I performed on color psychology and its applications with neuromarketing. I began my research with an overarching question of how can color psychology be used effectively in neuromarketing, keeping in mind its limitations. And that last part is extremely important because color psychology, like several other disciplines involved with neuromarketing, are probabilistic and not deterministic, which means that a lot of different neuroscientific principles, as well as color psychology, can be applied to neuromarketing extremely effectively, along with several other fields. The limitations spring from the fact that everyone experiences everything differently, and this is especially true with color psychology. Within the field of neuromarketing, it is often repeated that there is no such thing as a buy button within the human mind. This means that despite what many people may think is neuromarketing's best attempts, there is no mechanism within the brain that can force a consumer to make a purchase or fall in line with a marketing message or a decision by some evil corporate overlords. It's just not possible. However, with color psychology, you can unlock certain methods that will help paint a marketing message, a brand, a product in a better light. And hopefully, with some of the research that I have conducted, we can continue to explore all of the avenues that color psychology unlocks within the greater field of neuromarketing. Firstly, I looked into several different research studies that have been conducted over the last 10-20 years to make up the bulk of the backbone of my own research. A lot of this research was neuroscientific in nature, which is perfect because it gave me a great starting place for me to build off of and discuss how color psychology works very well with other neuroscientific principles. I took a lot of other inspiration on the application of color psychology and its effectiveness from several different online articles and other studies that have been conducted as well. Most notably from Carey, Lisher, and as well as utilizing a neurodesign book that was written by Darren Bridger, in which he discussed several other studies. The more I looked into my research, the more I narrowed down some of my choices. And I did throw out some redundant articles or research that was already used in other places. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the research studies that I showcased in my own research. Darren Bridger, in his book Neurodesign, discussed a couple of studies that related specifically to color association and the associations that people make with color and kind of out of the ordinary ideas. Within color association, it is often considered that there are general concepts and ideas, both positive and negative, that can be easily applied to several different colors on the color wheel. This is not always the case, but this also extends beyond simple associations with generalities. In one of these studies, research conducted showed the associations that were made between both colors and letters in the English alphabet. Further research was conducted on both the Dutch and the Hindi alphabets. However, we're only concerned with the English alphabet. An interesting find from this research found that 30% of those that participated mostly associated the color red with the letter A. And that might not make much sense at face value, but it can be kind of simple to think about. For instance, red is the color of an apple, which in English starts with A. Now, the reasons behind these associations were not fully discussed within the research. The research was simply conducted to discover those associations. And it should be noted that 30% of those surveyed associated the color red with the letter A. From there, it ranges from 13 to another 30% for other select letters in the alphabet. However, associations with all 26 letters were not conducted, only for a select number. But it is interesting to think about that the lowest frequently associated color to a letter was 13%. That's still a very significant amount of a population. The same researchers that conducted the study showing the correlations between color and letters in the English alphabet also conducted another study that showed correlations between color and days of the week. Interestingly enough, red was also associated with Monday in the highest frequency, most of those surveyed associating red with Monday 32% of the time. The rest of the colors for the days of the week were as follows. Tuesday was yellow for 27% frequency. Wednesday was green for 31% frequency. Thursday was also green with 25% frequency. Friday and Saturday were both blue, with 21 and 22% frequency respectively, and while Sunday was associated most frequently with the color white for 20%. Now that's an interesting correlation. Red was not only associated with the letter A, the first letter in the English alphabet, but was also associated with Monday, which, depending on who you ask, may consider Monday to be the first day of the week. Red has a certain primacy associated with it, and it is an extremely important color in our world around us. However, it is also important to note that blue and green also had a frequency of association that was higher than any other color. They were both associated with 2 different days. This is probably perhaps that they are also primary colors, and therefore make up all of the other colors in the color spectrum, so they are kind of at the forefront of people's minds. The next study we'll be looking at makes up a backbone of the research. Researchers in Portugal put together an fMRI study of different subjects' reactions to objects, artifacts, and non-objects that were both colored and not colored. What they discovered was that color, despite being a visual process, was also activated in other regions of the brain that are outside of the occipital lobe, where most of the visual processing is believed to occur within the mind. Outside of the occipital lobe, for colored objects, brain activity was also seen to occur in the superior parietal lobule, the precuneus, the hippocampus, and the fusiform gyrus. With colored non-objects, there was brain activation seen to occur within the parohippocampal gyrus, the superior parietal lobule bilaterally, and the left inferior middle temporal region. What this means is color, which is a relatively primal aspect of visual processing, occurs in other regions outside of the occipital lobe, specifically when there is also an abstract idea behind color. This is because it causes someone to access their memories associated with that color because there is no clear object identifier. Now, this has twofold meaning. First, this alludes to the fact that color is a great object identifier. We have several color associations with several objects throughout our world. For instance, a pencil might be a yellowish orange, or we might consider apples to be red, or pears to be green. Very simply, we can begin to understand what an object is just by looking at the color of it before we even understand the shape of that object. What this also means is that color can make us begin to think in ways that are simply not reactionary. They can trigger emotions in the limbic system, of which the hippocampus is a part of. It can also begin the basics of higher cognitive function, which will be accessed within the parietal lobe, which deals with visuospatial processing. The next study we'll be looking at is an agreement of several neuroscientific principles of the last study. This study, which was conducted at Rice University, shows how priming using color occurs at the point of stimulus rather than at the point of perception of those colors. Within this study, 2 different experiments were conducted. One which measured reaction time to being exposed to certain colors, and the other measuring the accuracy of these reactions based on priming. This was done by measuring when the subjects pressed certain buttons to indicate when they perceived colors correctly after being exposed to the stimuli. Certain green and blue stimuli, referred to as masks, were shown in short intervals, with a white mask intended to serve as a neutral stimulus. What these graphs show is how reaction times and accuracy were affected after being exposed to a color primer. Congruent masks yielded faster results, and when masks were introduced in the second experiment, they caused a greater degree of confusion. That's because despite the quick exposure to the stimuli in between masks, they were being processed subconsciously before the subjects could actually form the cognitive processes to consciously perceive that they were there. What this study serves to show us is how color is perceived on an extremely subconscious level. In fact, it is so subconscious that we will actually begin to react to the colors that are being perceived before we actually understand that we are looking at them. That's how powerful color can be. Now, keeping in mind the neuroscientific research we've already discussed, let's delve into the realm of color psychology itself. Now, there are several traditional color associations, both positive and negative, that most color psychologists will agree have the effect of this. Now, these effects have been documented and measured for several years now, so we will use this chart to help us look over them. So let's take a look at a few of these color associations. Remember red, how it seemed to be associated most frequently with the letter A and also with Monday? Well, that's because red gives off a certain feeling of energy, strength, power, passion. These are all things that are readily associated with red, very powerful and positive emotions. Of course, there are also negative associations, anger, danger, defiance, aggression being some of perhaps the most prevalent that we'll see. Now, we don't have to go into too much depth with all of these. You can look over them in your own time. Feel free to pause the video and explore all the different color associations. There's just simply too many here to go into too much depth. But we can begin to understand how these different colors can affect people in a marketing setting and how they can be used effectively to prime not only for certain emotions, but also for certain concepts and generalizations. Now, unfortunately, these color associations are not going to be the same for everybody. Perhaps not even a majority or even a plurality of those you're trying to reach. There is simply too much variation within everyone's own personal experiences, their upbringing, the environment, even the environment that the message is displayed in. There is simply too much to account for this to be even effective a majority of the time. With that in mind, however, you should still be readily available to take advantage of color psychology from a neuromarketing perspective. And here's how we'll do that. Let's discuss a couple of key marketing concepts, priming and positioning. We'll start with priming. Let's go back to red. It's perhaps my favorite example throughout this entire video. There was an article written by Robert Dooley, a neuromarketer, who states that red is perhaps one of the most powerful colors to be utilized in personal sales. This is because with red, for men and women, there's a certain amount of sexuality associated with the color. Essentially, using red, you can prime a sales target by appealing to their sense of sexuality, and this can make them more open to persuasion. This can be a powerful tool. What I found in a lot of articles is that fast food companies like to utilize red because red is also considered a high energy color that can help stimulate appetite. But the Taco Bell logo doesn't have an overt use of red. However, they get a relative context-based priming effect from using the different shades of blue, which they now benefit from the priming effect of both red and blue, simply because of the way that the shade was used. Now let's discuss other techniques that color psychology can aid in, specifically positioning. There was a study conducted in 2001 by researchers Goolsby and Suzuki, which, amongst its many revelations, showed that the effects of color priming can last for about 17 seconds. Now, what this means is within the marketplace, the effect of color itself can stay with the consumer for a significant amount of time, especially when browsing an aisle or scrolling on a page. Within my paper, I use the Fiji water bottle as a great example of positioning. Within water bottle design, there is a lot of symmetry, there is a lot of uniformity. However, if you're walking on an aisle in a grocery store or looking into the refrigerated section at a gas station, you're looking through all of your options. What seems to stand out to you about a Fiji water bottle? Well, let's take a look. Now, this label conforms with prototypical ideals in its color choice in a sense. It is blue. There is a reflection of the ocean in there, perhaps a reflection of a natural source of water. However, on the bottom of that bottle, that one little pink flower goes a long way. Now let's go back to our consumer looking at the water bottles. Let's say they notice the Fiji bottle for a second at the most. Well, they noticed that pink flower, whether they did so consciously or subconsciously, it doesn't really matter. That pink stood out to them in some way, especially against the sea of other dull blue labels. They look around some more, but that Fiji water bottle, and especially its unique form, being not so prototypical as the other water bottles, stands out a lot. Darren Bridger, in the text Neurodesign, discusses Ramachandran's 9 principles. The Fiji water bottle utilizes a few of them, but let's just take a look at one of them in concept with the neuroaesthetic concept of prototypicality. Now, the concept of contrast from Ramachandran's 9 principles is utilized very simply but very effectively by the Fiji water bottle design. The calm blue background that signifies the ocean, a natural source of water, and then the pink flower at the forefront, which symbolizes an almost peaceful energy that is brought to the entire design concept. Now, the Fiji water bottle is very unusual from other water bottle brands, just in the design of the bottle itself. This helps it stand out significantly in a market space. The concept of fitting in within a market space is referred to as prototypicality. All products require a certain degree of prototypicality, but breaking prototypicality in a creative way can help the product stand out. This is exactly what Fiji does with their bottle design, as well as their label design. Color psychology of those colors used also helps Fiji stand out in a different way entirely. Now, evolutionarily speaking, humans are very in tune to seeing brighter colors and more receptive to brighter colors because that is the color of fruit. Now, within our genetic history, it has been theorized that humans at one point were heavily reliant on foraging. So, when Fiji uses the pink or red, if you will, flower against the blue background, it contrasts a warm color that is very out there and in your face against the cooler blue background. And it is actually, in that sense, easier for someone to pick out as well. Now, combining those with the other neurodesign principles discussed, that creates an extremely powerful positioning technique that catapults Fiji out of the league of any other water bottles that are remotely near it on the shelves or in the refrigerated space. Coming to the end of the discussion, it is important to keep a couple of things in mind. First of all, despite all of the great qualities that I just described within that Fiji water bottle, it will fail in its marketing outreach at the very least some of the time. That is because color psychology, neuromarketing, the neuroscientific principles we discussed are probabilistic and not deterministic, as was discussed at the very beginning of this video. That is extremely important to keep in mind for marketers. There is no one technique, there is no one color, there is not even a guarantee that a color will even promote the desired effect. It is extremely possible for a consumer to go into that same aisle where that Fiji water bottle was and go, it's just a little too pretty. I'm just looking for water here, guys. I'm going to go for the Deer Park or the Aquafina or the Dasani. Pretty bland, pretty prototypical. If it stands out too much, it might trigger a sense in the amygdala of avoidance or something else within the limbic system or within the brain itself. And maybe there was a memory. Maybe when their mom came home every night while working hard, that she always brought a case of Dasani water into the house. Maybe there was always Dasani water around in a childhood setting. There's so many different variables that can cause color psychology to fail. And that's okay. That's totally acceptable in a neuromarketing setting. There's nothing in neuromarketing, there's nothing that will be 100% totally effective. However, it is still important to understand the frequency of the associations, how these associations will be made, and how they connect to those neural pathways in the brain. So what can be understood from all of this research is that color psychology in a neuromarketing sense is more of an art form than an exact science. There are scientific principles which back it up. However, levers must be pulled, knobs must be tweaked, colors must be applied in different ways in order to get an effective use of the color psychology from any design or any marketing message. Now, looking into all of the studies we've looked at in this video, I would say that in the future, there should probably be some more fMRI studies as to how people react to colors, not just from an object, non-object, or artifact sense, but perhaps even in a shopping space as well. How all of the very complex visual information that must be brought in a complex scene such as an aisle in a shopping center, how that color is processed within the mind. And very focusing especially on the occipital lobe, but also within that parietal lobe, as well as within the perihippocampal gyrus. And really pay attention to how different colors react differently. Maybe within the brain, maybe red highlights a different area that brown doesn't, and vice versa. But we don't really know without more fMRI studies being done. I feel like that's extremely important. Now, my final takeaways from this is that color is fascinating. It is extremely complex. It is used in so many different settings for so many different desired effects, but it can be overbought into, as well as several other neuromarketing concepts. At the end of the day, you can't force somebody to receive your message in a proper way. So it's a really interesting tool to keep in mind, but it should never be the main driving force behind a marketing technique. However, a lot of interesting stuff that I learned along the way here. This project was very taxing, but I learned a lot from it, and I have a lot of takeaways from it, especially going forward in my own professional career. And hopefully I can continue to use some of the concepts I learned going forward. Please take a look at my references. Thank you for hanging with me throughout this whole video. There's a lot going on here. Feel free to go back and look at some of the frames, really take in that color psychology chart. It's a great tool, shows great positive and negative associations. And thank you once again. Here's my references. Have a good one.